Thank you for watching this recording of our live OneClick Q&A webinar. During the next 50 minutes, we will cover 28 different topics which are listed on the screen in front of you. The webinar will begin shortly. Thank you. So we're now recording, and we're going to start with the first question, and the first few questions we've had relate to activation. So Natasha is going to take us through how you can activate your clients.
So yeah, we do have quite a lot of questions around how client activation actually works, and a lot around that process. So I thought we would start with that today. Now, when you go and activate your clients, you do have two ways in which you can activate your clients. So if you happen to be dealing with one individual client, you can go into that client's record, and hopefully everyone can see my screen here. You can see that I'm in a client record now. And you can go ahead and you can try and activate that client individually. To activate the client, the one thing that's very important for you to know is that within the responsibility tab for that client, you need to have at least one partner who is activated for OneClick. So that's very important, because the reason it's important to have an activated partner in there is because that person will appear as a correspondent for that client. Okay, so you are here indicating who can correspond with that client. You can also add other people within the client team, but you have to have at least one partner. So the system won't allow you to activate your client until you have done that. So it's very, very important for you to know. The other thing that you need to do before you go ahead and activate your client is you need to ensure that that client has got an email address. So if I go here under the addresses section, and I went earlier and I added in an email record, and I've added in their email address in there, that's another thing that obviously you will need in order to activate your client. Now, following on from that, what else you'll need to do is you'll need to then go and press activate, and the activate button can be found under the tasks area up here, and then you can go ahead and click activate OneClick. And what that will do is it will send that client an email address that they will then an email that they will then follow with a link to activate their account, okay, and a username and a password that they will have to enter as well. Now I will go ahead and I will press that now and activate Johnny. Now in this case, you can choose which features you want to add in here for the client. I'm just going to keep the OneClick workspace, which does include the messages and documents facility, which is our old portal solution in there. So if I go ahead and press OK, that's me having activated that client. Okay, now before I go on to the activation flow, I'm just going to very quickly show you another way that you can activate your clients is through the Find Clients tab. If you want to do a bulk activation of clients, you can do that through here. You can search for a particular criteria of clients, or if you're feeling brave, you can go ahead and you can search for all of them. Tick whoever you want over here, and then you can press activate, and that will send a bulk activation to all of those clients. Now bear in mind, if one of the clients on this list doesn't have a partner, an activated partner in their responsibility tab, or they don't have an email address, then when you activate them, it will come back and it will say this one didn't have an email address, this one didn't have an activated partner, and it'll fail just for those records, but it will go through. And so we have a question here around that a partner should also be in the team responsibility tab, and that is correct. They should be appearing in there. Right, okay, so if I now go into my email address, now I'm going to pick up, this is a little temporary email system that I tend to use for testing purposes, just to remind myself of this person's email address. A temporary email address I use for testing purposes. I'm going to go in there So right, here we go. So I've got here my notification coming through that I've gone ahead and activated this user. Now I can go ahead and click on the link, and what it's going to do is it's going to take me through to activate this client. Okay, so me as a client, I've followed through on this link, and it's taken me to an activation ID page. Now here's where we get a lot of questions, because people ask, what is the activation ID? The default activation ID for a client is the client's client code. Okay, so you will need to have sent the client, their client code in order for them to be able to enter that into the system. So this client code is BLA21, and you can see that in here. Okay, and that client, you'll have to give it to the client, because then that client will have to use that in order to go ahead and activate. So I'm going to go ahead and enter that person's activation ID through here, and just type that in. Okay, and that will take me through to another page, and it'll ask them to go ahead and create their password. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay. Okay, and then what it's going to do is it's going to ask me to enter some security questions. Now, you do have the option in Central to remove the security questions piece if you want to, but we recommend people use it because it helps afterwards if they need to reset their password. Okay, and I'll just add that the answers to these questions are not my own particular answers, but they're just some generic ones. Okay, so I'm going ahead and I've done that, and I've entered into the system. Now, some people find, you can see here a little tutorial, some people find that they would like another way of being able to give their clients a client code, an activation ID, which isn't the client code. So I'm going to show you how to use SMS in order to be able to send a randomly generated activation code to that particular user. If you were to go into File, okay, and Maintenance, and OneClick, okay, and then we were to go into Security, you can see here an option that says Send Activation ID via SMS. If you tick that option, any client who has a mobile number under their addresses section, when you go ahead and you activate that client, when they click through that link and they end up on the page to enter their activation ID, at that point they will receive a text on their phone with a randomly generated code that they can use in that section. So they can go ahead and they can pop that randomly generated code into the activation ID, and that will do the activation for them. And a lot of people have really liked that as a way of sending out the ID because it gives it to them then and there, rather than them having to trawl through and find what their client code is. So you do have that option, and if you do have any client records that don't have a phone number under their addresses section, they can still use the client code. You can still issue that to them, but otherwise that is the SMS activation, and as I said, a lot of people have really liked using that. So that is how we go ahead and we activate clients. I'll probably mention at this point that we're also looking at moving to a new authentication system, which will be coming out over the next few months. This authentication system will also include the likes of multi-factor authentication as well, allowing practices to choose whether they want to have people validate or put in an activation code every single time they log in, and a few practices have been asking for that too. So that covers pretty much the client activation.
Okay, Natasha, we've just got a couple of quick questions here that you might be able to just say yes or no answers to. Mary has just asked, does the SMS only go to the primary mobile number?
Yes, that's right. Indeed.
And Jill has asked about editing the emails that get sent to clients. So maybe could you just quickly go in and show?
Yes, we absolutely can do that. Let me show you in here. Okay, So if I find, here we go. So I went to File, I went to Maintenance, and I went to OneClick, and you've got here an option called Email Templates. Now within this, it holds all of the standard emails that we send out from OneClick. So you're going to see things like some reminder notifications, the ability here when you're activating a client for OneClick, that one in particular I know you asked for, you can double click into that, and what it will show you is it will show you a template for that particular email. Not sure why it's not letting me double click into it. Okay, I'm not sure. Oh, here we go. I wasn't double clicking properly. Right. So anyway, so it'll allow you to see that email template, and you can go ahead and you can make it as bespoke as you want to your practice. But you can see there's some merge fields that will be popped in. We probably recommend you keep those in. It'll populate that email with the salutation for that particular client. The domain name, which is probably quite important for you to know, your domain name is what you chose as your subdomain for your URL. Okay, so for example here, if we were to create our own workspace, we would probably call it something like walterskluwer.accountantspace.co.uk, and it will populate here the domain name being Walters Kluwer. So a lot of practices like using the name of their own practice in there. It'll also populate in your practice name, and obviously your link, you'll need to keep that in there because that's a link to the activation ID. But otherwise, feel free to tailor the wording as much as you want, and in fact, we probably recommend you go over this and have a look before you start sending out client activations.
Couple more quick questions. Sally has asked about the activation logo appearing against the clients. And just to interpret her question, I think she's saying, at what stage does the activation logo appear against the client? Is it when you've activated them as the user or when they have accepted the email and clicked the link to activate?
Okay, fine. So we have here an activation logo in here. So if I go into my Find Client screen, you can see here a logo for every single client that has gone ahead and activated. But if you really want to have a look if a particular individual has activated, you can go in here, okay? And you can see here, actually, I'll show you this bit here. This little logo here for this particular client shows that they've gone through that activation process and they've entered their username and password. So having this logo within client record is what shows them that.
A question from Matthew, can you have more than one email template for an activation email?
No, at this point in time, we only have the one email template for the client. Obviously, you have another one for your employees, but for the client, there's only the one standard one.
Okay, so next question, it comes back from the emails that we've had in advance. Have we got any pointers that you can give perhaps on for practices that want to test the activation process before they activate any of their live clients?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of people, obviously want to do a little bit of testing, and as part of OneClick, you do have obviously 20 licenses as part of the package. I would absolutely recommend that people go ahead and set themselves up as a test client. Firstly, so that you understand the process that your client will go through. You'll understand how internally you want to manage that process of activating clients, at what stage you want to activate clients within your own company's process of setting up a client. But also because it's important for you to feel like you know how to support your client. And the reason for that is because OneClick is essentially a white labeled application. Clients will not be seeing reference to our company name. So if they do have any questions, they will be coming back to you, and it's important that you sort of understand how the process works so that you can answer those if needs be. What I would say is, go ahead, create a new client, create a dummy client. But what I would recommend is don't use your own email address as an employee to do that. Maybe if you want, you can add in, you can maybe use your personal address, but don't use your work email address, because if you do want to, then when you go ahead and activate yourself as an employee, it will show as a duplicate email address on the system, and we need to have individual email addresses as they are obviously usernames for OneClick. So just don't use your own email address.
Next question then is from Mary. Can we use the same email address more than once? For example, I have a client who has many companies whom we would send secure messages and documents to, but the email address of the finance director is the same in each case.
Right, okay, so you can't have the same email address more than once. But I think that question leads me towards one that we get asked quite a lot, which I think it would be good for us to look at, which is the question around, what do we do when we have a business and that business has multiple directors that you happen to be dealing with as well. And I think it might be worth at this point looking into that particular scenario, because I think that actually covers that question as well. So if you look here, I've got my client, Wayne Enterprises. So Wayne Enterprises is obviously an organization, and as an accountant, I do work for Wayne Enterprises. I do some work for that company. But obviously Wayne Enterprises is not an individual, it's an organization. And I happen to have a director, and that director is Bruce Wayne. And Bruce Wayne is my contact for that particular business. In this case, the way you manage it is you think this client record here represents the work that you are doing for that particular client. So if you want to do work for Wayne Enterprises, for example, you're doing some accounts work or you're doing some corporation tax work, you need to be within this client record. So that means that you need to activate this client record, okay, in order to do work for them. And then in turn, you'll be able to go ahead when you're in accounts production, you'll be able to publish documents straight up there or publish documents for corporation tax, and it will go to the Wayne Enterprises workspace. But Wayne Enterprises isn't an individual, they're managed by a director. So how do you manage that? Now, the associated tab here in Central is where you manage the users that deal with that particular workspace, okay? So what you'll want to do is you'll want to either add a new contact in here, or if the person happens to be a client themselves, then you would associate another client into this associated section. So in this case, I've got a client who's Bruce Wayne, and he is someone I do personal tax returns for, but he's also the director for Wayne Enterprises. So what I've done is I've associated Bruce into this particular record, okay, and I can use him as the contact person for Wayne Enterprises. And just to point that out, I have here an addresses area here. There's no email address for Wayne Enterprises because obviously Wayne Enterprises is not an individual. What I'm going to do, you can see here the OneClick is not activated. If I were to go ahead and activate OneClick, okay, it's going to tell me that it's going to enable access to OneClick, and at least one associated contact will need to be activated for OneClick. Do you want to proceed? And I'm going to say yes. And it's going to ask me to choose. Now, if I had multiple contacts in this section, I'd have multiple contacts in here. Each contact being individuals, they are users, they have their own email addresses. I would go ahead and I would tick this option here, and I would press OK. Okay, and what that's done is it's gone ahead and it's given Bruce Wayne access to Wayne Enterprises. Okay, now it's probably worth mentioning at this point that Bruce Wayne was already activated himself for his own workspace for the work that the accountant does personal tax for. So he was already activated, which is why it said that Bruce Wayne has been notified of that addition, and Bruce Wayne will be able to log in and he'll be able to see both his own and Wayne Enterprises correspondence. Now, if Bruce had not been activated, if this was the first time you were activating someone, then Bruce would have received an activation email, and he would have gone through that flow similar to the one I showed previously with Johnny Blaze, and when he prompted to enter the activation ID, it's probably worth noting at this point that the activation ID, the client code that he'd be using for that activation ID, would have been the one for Wayne Enterprises. So that's WE01. So he would not have been using his own one. So it's quite important. We do get that question quite a lot. That is a client code he would have been using. So that's a client workspace he's going through. Okay, but like I said, in this case, Bruce has activated himself previously, so he's just given additional information. Okay, so that's how you do it. And if you had multiple directors in here, you can go ahead and add all of them in here. And then obviously, if Bruce himself happens to be associated with Wayne Enterprises, but also another, maybe Stark Industries or something like that, you can add him in as an associated contact for those other ones, and he will see through his one login, he will see access to his own accounts, he will see access to Wayne Enterprises, he'll see have access to Stark Industries. So that's how you deal with either multiple directors within one organization, or one director dealing with multiple organizations.
Another quick question before we go on to the next one that you probably wanted to do a demonstration of, and that is the email address. If we've got multiple email addresses stored against contact, and in this particular question, Rachel asks if we've got an email address for the primary email address, a confidential email address, and a secondary email address, which one is the email going to be sent to?
Okay. So the one that it'll be sent to is a primary email address, which is the one that appears, actually won't appear here because I've added one in already. Actually, I can do it in this one. Okay, which is a primary email address, and that's the one it will be sent to on here. Okay, and you go ahead and you tick that, and you see that's a primary email address.
And a question related to what you've just demonstrated, the person that's asked has said, I've got a client who's a high net worth individual. I want to activate their PA, not the high net worth individual. How would I go about doing that?
Yeah, very good question. Very good question. So the way that you would do that, if the person's an individual, obviously if they're an organization, it does ask you by default to choose an associated contact. But if the person's an individual, it doesn't. It lets you go ahead and activate them straight away using the email address that's under their record. But if you don't want to do that, and we do have quite a few cases in that respect, then what we would recommend is you leave the email address blank when you go to activate them, okay? And when you press activate, it will ask you to pick someone from the associated contacts list to choose as the contact for that particular individual. So if you go ahead, you remove the email address, make sure there's no email address here, and press activate, and the system will prompt you to pick an associated contact, which could be his PA. And then after you've done that, you obviously can go ahead and pop their email address back in, but just for the point of activation, just keep it blank.
We've had 3 or 4 questions that are almost identical. Is there a way to limit which contacts see documents when you've got multiple contacts within an organisation?
There is, absolutely. So, and that actually brings me back to this section here. Which is if you send a message to your client, and in fact, let me do that in here. If I go ahead and I'll choose Tony Stark, I won't be able to log in because I've clearly changed his password at some point. So if I go ahead and I create a message, okay, to Tony as an accountant, I can go ahead and I can choose which contacts under Tony's record I want to send that information to, or I want to send particular documents to. And it's worth mentioning the system does a good job in segregating this information, because if you only choose one particular individual and you attach a document in there, only that contact within that account will see that information. So even if you have a message exchange and you go ahead and include another contact further down the conversation, that contact will still not receive the previous conversations that the previous messages and documents that they weren't included in to start off with. So it is very, very much segregated, and you can rest assured if you do want to send information to only one contact and ensure that another contact within that workspace doesn't see it, then you can do so by making sure that only the contact that you wish to see the information is in this to section.
A related question from our email earlier in the week, someone, and I've forgotten the name, emailed and just said about when it comes, the message comes the other way, do all contacts within the accounting practice see the message that the client sends? And also, how do they set the notification so they can get emailed to be alerted when a message comes in.
Okay, so good question. So yes, they do. They do see the all the messages that come in, as long as we don't have some team security in place. So team security is something that you can enable to stop employees within the business from seeing a client record as a whole. So, for example, if you happen to be dealing with, I don't know, David Beckham's account, and you don't want anyone else in the business to see it, you can set team security, and they won't see that client record as a whole. But if you do have access to see that client record, you will be able to go into the message center and see the message exchange that's happened in here. However, if you wanted to, you could go ahead and you could delete that message if you don't want anyone else to see it once you've received it. Now, what was the other question? The other part of that question, Richard?
So the question was, how do I enable the alerts so as I can get email?
Yes, that was it. Absolutely. So we do have an ability to do that. Let me see if I can remember off the top of my head where it is. And if anyone's using Portal on the phone, you probably are thinking, press that button, press that button. Where is it? Security. You do have the ability to select, to choose as a practice to receive emails we do have an ability as a practice to receive an email notification if a client has sent you a message. You have to turn that on, okay? So it's not on by default. You have to turn that on to receive it, but it will be sent to the person. The notification is only sent to the person who is the recipient of the message. So not everyone in the practice will receive a notification for every single message that comes in. But it's worth mentioning that when you do select that option, it's set at a practice level. So it means that everyone in the practice will receive notifications if a client has sent themselves a message. So you do have that option there to enable that. Okay, fine. So another question that I get asked quite a lot here is sending messages for review. So you can go ahead if you've created a message in the system, and I think I've got Tony Stark here who's sent a message. If as a client, as an employee, I want to go ahead and I want to create a message, but I want someone else, another employee within my business, to review that message before I send it, then what I can do is I can create a message. I think I must have sent a message earlier. I'll choose it from here. Okay. If I go ahead and create a message, I don't know why that's happening. If I go ahead and create a message, and I'll actually show you this through my homepage. If I go ahead and create a message, I can send a message for review, and I can choose one of my employees within the business to review that message, okay? And that person can then review it. And one thing I'll say is that you have to open up the message, okay, in order to be able to review it. So if you go ahead and you review that, and you can mark it as completed, and then that other employee can go ahead and can send it out themselves if they want. So that's a review system in here. Okay, another question that we get a lot of as well is around documents. So if you've received any documents at all, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on this documents area here, which was within the Message Center tab. If you go ahead and if you receive any documents from your clients, you can open up this documents area and you can actually file them to DM, or you can file them down to your local disk if you have an area that you want to save them into as well. So if you open up that document section here, you will see all the documents that come in. You can also see a little bit of a summary here of any documents that were approved or rejected, or any that are pending approval as well for that particular client. You can see all the documents in here that you've received from your client, and you can go ahead and tick them, and you can choose to save them to document management or save them to disk if you want. So that's how you can file away the documents that you receive from your clients.
Okay, so I think this might be a yes/no answer for you, Natasha, and we've had two questions very similar. One is if I send a message to two directors of a company and one replies, will the other be automatically copied? And a similar question, if I want to send a message and I want to copy someone else on the team, can I do that? So this is the second one, was the practice sending a message to the client. They want to copy someone else on the team that may not actually, the message actually specifically says, may not actually be in the responsibility or in the team for that client. Can they copy their internal staff?
Okay, good question. So we've got, so if a client happens to, if a client has received, a director has received a message from a member of a practice, then what he can do is when he goes to reply, by default, the other people who are copied in within his, the other directors that are copied into that message will also be in on the reply. Okay, so if Director A and Director B are sent a message at the same time, they're both copied into a message. When Director A responds, Director B will automatically be copied in as well. But he can choose to remove Director B if he wants to from that message. And I think the opposite you mentioned was if an employee wants to copy in another employee,
Internally,
right?
yes.
Internally, which is a very good question, because that's a very hot topic. We have had a lot of practice asking that, and at present you can't actually copy in other employees. However, we do have that as a top priority to be dealing with in our next development increment. So you will be seeing that feature coming in very shortly over the next few months.
Next question is, how do I get clients to approve documents?
Okay, very good question. So if I want to go ahead and send a document for approval, then my client, and I don't think I've got an option here, I'm trying to see if I've got a previously set up one, but possibly not, because it's possibly in my one where I've changed my password. But you can send documents to be approved by your clients, and to do that, you can either send a message by the message center, or if you happen to be publishing a document through any of our compliance products, you can also set those for approval as well. And then you can actually choose which of the contacts you want to approve in the system. So it can be all of the contacts within that client record. It can be just one of the contacts if you want, and you can set them for approval, and then the client can go ahead and they can approve it on their side, and all they have to do is they have to enter a password with which just confirms their identity, and that will confirm the approval process.
So the next question then is, going back to what we talked about earlier about activating clients, can we resend the activation email to multiple clients at once, or do we, if a client rings up and says they never received the activation email and we have 5 clients ring up, can we send it all at once, or do we have to go and send them individually?
Okay, so you can resend an activation email, but I think that's done individually. So if I go here and I try and think of one of my victims in here, so let's say Wayne Enterprises, because I sent an activation email to Bruce, from what I remember. So one thing that is probably worth noting actually is that you can see here that Wayne Enterprises obviously was activated because I activated Bruce under his as a contact under his account. I'll actually mention now, because I showed this previously, but there was if that contact had gone through and entered his username and password, then you would see a logo appearing in here to say that he created those credentials and he's logged in. But I never went through that process on the phone. So obviously he doesn't have a logo, and that tells you that even though you have physically activated that client, he hasn't gone through and entered his username and password. And you can see here, if you want to look at it on a contact level, you can see here each contact record has a one-click status option, and you can go ahead and you can choose and see if the person is activated in there, okay? And you can suspend access to OneClick, or if they need to, you can resend the activation email through here as well. Okay.
Okay, I suspect this question is something you just talk about rather than demonstrate. To cut it short, I've sent the company accounts to the bookkeeper, but it turns out it should have been another person within that company that needs to review those accounts. Do I need to resend it, or can the bookkeeper forward it on? So you've got two contact people within the same client organisation. I've sent the message to one of them. Can they forward it to the other person, or do I need to resend it to the other person?
So if you're sending a message to a particular client, can the client forward it on to another client? Is that correct? Sorry, to another contact. Another contact. No, I believe you would need to, the person would need to, the employee would need to resend that.
Okay. Mark asks a question which we're actually going to cover right at the end. I'll answer it now, Mark, about the user manual. Right at the end of this webinar, we're going to show you how you can access the OneClick Resource Centre. So we'll come back to that one, Mark. Next question comes back to employee activation again. Or actually, have we covered? I haven't been concentrating on what you've been saying because I've been concentrating on the questions, Natasha. Have we covered employee activation or only client activation so far?
No, we haven't covered employee activation, actually.
So I'll read this question. If an employee has the incorrect email address in the employee record, can you change the email address and resend the activation resend the activation email? And that also, you'll remember we had a question similar to that by email the other day in preparation for this. A client has notified that they have changed the email address. What does the practice need to do?
Yes, absolutely. So, so a couple of questions on there. So I'll just start off with the client one because I've got this open in here. So as you know, this is where the client record is. So you've got the client record and you've got his email address in here. If your client tells you that they want to use a new email address, then you can absolutely go ahead and you can change that. But just bear in mind that it will change the username that they use to log into the system. And the system will prompt you and tell you that their username will change. It won't send them a message about it, but you will need, obviously to make sure that the client uses that new email address that you've put in as a username to access OneClick going forward. And then I think the other question was around employee activation. And actually, before I go into that, maybe I'll quickly talk about how you activate employees if anyone if no one on call has done it yet. But to activate employees, you go into the employees area in here. You can go ahead and you can tick some options in here and you can press activate. And really the only thing you need to remember with employees is that they need to have an email address in there. Okay, now if you do go ahead and you change their email address, then in order to, and they had a wrong email address and you want to resend the activation email, then you can absolutely go ahead and do that. You tick the person that you changed the email address under their record, and you can go ahead and you can press resend activation email. Now, one thing I will mention is that we had a couple of occasions where some practices had changed their employee's email address and that they found that resending the activation email was not going through because it was still picking up that old email address. We have fixed this for 2018.2. So if you are on the latest version of 2018.2, you won't see that anymore. And if you're not and you've experienced this, then please go ahead and install 2018.2 as you'll see that that isn't an issue anymore.
The next question for Natasha comes from an email from earlier in the week, and is how do I delete a client from OneClick once I've activated them?
Okay, yep, good question. So, so at present, okay, you can, if you're looking to stop a client from using OneClick, then you can go ahead and you can press within this little hyperlink here. Go ahead and press that, and then you can press suspend access to OneClick. That's going to suspend the user's access. We are, for the next feature, looking at a complete deactivation of OneClick, which will also remove all of the documents and messages that happen to be sitting online for that document, for that that particular client. We'll be looking at that for the next release. But if you do want to do that in the time being, you just press suspend and it will suspend that client's access. They won't be able to log in anymore. You also won't be charged that client either. If you do want to delete a client completely from Central, if you're not working with that client, maybe they've asked you to delete them, you can choose to delete the clients through the normal ways of deleting clients from Central, and that will also delete their OneClick account as well.
Okay. Next question is regarding messaging. It came from email earlier in the week. Regarding sending messages, can I format the message by underlining or using bold font?
Okay, yes, another good question, and we have had a few people request that. At present, you can't do any form of additional formatting into the messages that practices are sending, or the clients are sending. You know, what I probably recommend, I think especially if people are sending marketing mail shots or anything like that, that you know, maybe create it on a Word document and you use it as an attachment instead initially. We do have this in the backlog though, we do have this in the backlog, but you know, it's probably not looking to come out for another few months yet.
Okay, another question, and I think you might have already covered this, but tell me if you have. How do I ask a colleague to review a message before I send it?
So if I go ahead and create a message to Johnny now, and I say, oh, I don't know, let's say your statement. I never know what to write in these scenarios. Okay. And then I go ahead and I attach a message here. Let's see if I've got anything under my VM that we can use as a message. Okay, so it's tax document. Okay, open. And obviously we had a question around requiring approval. So if you want to mark a message for approval, you just tick on here. Okay, and one thing that you do need to mention, you do need to remember as well when you are marking it for approval, is that you need to make sure that it's in the correct folder. So it can't sit under the shared folder. It needs, okay, to be under a particular folder in here. So it just can't sit on the shared folder. And if I go ahead and I mark it for approval, okay, and then that's going to be set for approval. So just if you do want to set an approval, that's how you do it. But what you want to do at this point is you want to send it for review. And to send it for review, you go ahead and you click on this button here. Okay, and you choose the employee that you want to send it to review to. So I'm going to choose, okay, who did I create the other day? Let's choose this person here. Okay, and I'm going to mark it for review. If I go ahead and then send it, what will happen at this point is it doesn't send it to the client yet. It's been marked as sent for review so that James Johnson can review it. And if I go to, I'll go to that one that I created previously. So if I go into here, okay, so I received, as Anna, who's the employee I'm logged in as, I received a review message earlier from James, and I can see that sitting in my task list under here, and I can go ahead and I can open it up, and I can open up that message there, okay, and I can see the message that that my colleague James Johnson has created and has asked me to review, and I'm reviewing it now. Okay, and what I can choose to do is I've got two options at this point as Anna. I can send it, I could press send, and that will send the message to my client. But if I send it now as Anna, it will come from Anna. Okay, so whoever's pressing that send button is the person that's going to be shown as the sender of that message. If I don't want to send it, if I'm just reviewing it for James and I want James to send it, then what I would suggest you do is you click on that button there and you search for James, okay, and then you can say approved. Okay, and you send it back to James, and you know now James will see on his homepage, he will see that there's a little task for him which says approved, and he will know that that's approved, and then he can go ahead and hit that send button, because again, quite important, whoever hits that send button is the sender of that message.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Got a couple more quick questions, hopefully. First one is, I've got an employee who I've activated for OneClick. He's now left, I assume we're talking about in the future. He has now left the accounting practice. How do I deactivate them for OneClick?
Okay, sure. So if I go into employees, and again, I'll have to remind myself where you do that, but you can absolutely do that. If I open up an employee record, and I believe it's sitting under, let me see if I can find where it is. I think it's under the passwords section, but I can't remember where that is. Is that under main? Here we go. Let me see if it's under here. Here we go. So if you go into that employee's record and you go to the main tab and then you go to password in here, and the reason we put it in here is because a lot of people manage their passwords and manage their employees through here, and you go ahead and you click on OneClick account, then you can press suspend this OneClick account, and that will suspend access for that employee.
We've had a few questions during the course of the last hour asking about future developments. Are you able to tell us anything about what our plans are for future developments, or how we're going to advise practices of what we're developing in the future?
So future development, obviously, you know, we have a number of product managers. We have team product managers here within Wolters Kluwer. Each of us deal with different products. So, you know, I'd have to defer to some of my other product managers to talk about their own roadmaps. In terms of OneClick, I mentioned a little bit about a new authentication system that we're moving towards. We've got, you know, it will deal with multi-factor authentication amongst some other really nice features that we've got coming up as well. But for the next release, what we are going to be looking to focus on a lot is some key usability improvements to really make the process as slick as possible for practices. We've had loads of feedback coming in because we've had so many people interested and wanting to jump onto OneClick. We've had a lot of feedback, and we're going to really focus on the next PI on, or rather the next development increment on improvements and usability improvements in that area. I did mention the ability to copy in employees. That's quite a top item on user voice, which I'm looking to implement as well. And I've also got another couple of items in user voice, which I'm hoping to push through as well. So that's the immediate roadmap, but again, I'll probably have to defer. I think, you know, I don't know, Phil, actually, we've got a couple of minutes. Maybe we might want to pass on to Phil, and Phil could talk a little bit about his areas on making tax digital and on open integration.
Yep, so from a making tax digital perspective, the main focus turns to VAT. So we'll be looking to, in the next quarter development cycle, to be introducing our VAT functionality for MTD. And from an open integration perspective, it's really just about expanding out the bookkeeping providers that can be part of the open integration. So in the next quarter, we will hopefully be releasing more integrations within that.
Okay, thanks, Phil. So that brings us to the end of our hour. I hope everyone that has been on the webinar has benefited. I know that we haven't covered all the questions. Sometimes with the questions I was able to consolidate 2 or 3 questions that were very similar when asking Natasha, but in other occasions we have actually skipped over, and I know we've skipped over your questions, and we will attempt to come back to you directly if we didn't answer your question. We will aim over the next few days to send everyone that was on this webinar today a link to a survey, which is going to ask you 2 or 3 questions. We'd really appreciate it if you will complete the survey. One of those questions will be, did you find this beneficial? Would you like to have another hour with us, another webinar in a few weeks' time, perhaps? So Natasha's just sharing the last slide or 2 slides on her screen. One of the questions that, I can't remember who it was, sorry, asked early on was about manuals. In fact, we had a couple of questions about manuals. We don't, being cloud technology, we don't have printed manuals. And I don't know that CCH has had printed manuals for some time either. But we do have a resource center. So when you're in OneClick on the cloud, you will have one of the tiles says support. And if you click on that, and Natasha's going to click on that, you will be taken then to our CCH support website. There are two things there. Firstly, the knowledge base, which hopefully you're all familiar with as CCH users. And if you click on the knowledge base, if you're not already logged on, you'll be asked to log in. And actually, the knowledge base, I can't remember whether it asks you to log in or not. I think it does. And then you can filter on OneClick, and you can search for whatever you're after. That is something that we're updating, and we're putting concerted effort into updating now, because we've got a lot of feedback, and even from these questions here, some of these will turn into knowledge base articles as well, the questions we received today. The other thing you'll see in the top right of the screen is the OneClick Resource Centre. And in there, you will be able to watch a couple videos that our go-to-market team have put together, showing you how to activate clients. For instance, it's maybe a 2 or 3 minute video, how to activate employees. If you haven't actually got started with OneClick yet and you happen to be on the webinar today, there's a video and a getting started guide on how to actually set up OneClick from scratch. There's other documentation there about how to modify your email templates and other areas like that. By all means, if you've got further questions, we gave you an email address that you could email your questions to in advance of this webinar. Continue to use that email address. It does come through to me, so I can monitor for those questions. And as I say, we will be sending out a survey, and if there's enough interest, we will run another webinar in a few weeks' time, perhaps. So thanks for joining us this morning. We've enjoyed talking to you. We will watch back the recording of this webinar and hopefully make it available to everyone that was on here if you want to have a refresher. Thank you very much.